my dad called to say, "Your mother is very hurt. You embarrassed us in front of everyone," after they chose a free meal over my graduation. Then they tried to access my bank account the day I left home. They seemed proud of it. I said nothing. That was 7 months ago. Yesterday, the judge served them their criminal charges. I had been excited about my graduation since the beginning of senior year. My parents knew how much it meant to me. I was valedictorian despite the 2 jobs I worked to help with rent, and the babysitting I did every Tuesday and Thursday so they could go for date nights. They were my family. We would do anything for each other, or at least that's what they told me. I reserved 2 seats for them in the front row, even paid the principal extra so he'd put leather padding onto the armrests so they'd be more comfortable, because I was sure they would do the same for me. Something happened the week before that though. My parents seemed annoyed because I couldn't pay for them. We went to celebrate my 18th birthday, and after my card declined and my dad had to cover the check, he wouldn't talk to me for the rest of the day. The graduation was perfect. I felt on top of the world in my cap and gown. My math teacher, Mizzy Jacobs, came over to me carrying the frames I requested. "You excited for the speech?" she asked. "Yeah, but even more excited to see my parents proud of me," I answered with a genuine smile. She placed the frames down on the 2 reserved seats, my 2 favorite pictures of me and my parents, and under them, small gift bags for my mom and dad, complete with a handwritten card and gift vouchers for a couple's spa day out. The graduation began at 10 a.m. when my parents said they'd arrive. They didn't like being early. I listened to the principal give her speech while glancing at the door every few seconds. At 10:30, the 2 reserved seats were still empty, and it was time to walk across the stage. When it was my turn, I stood up and fake stumbled, then bent down to adjust my gown. I did it to buy myself a few extra seconds, as if those were the seconds during which my parents would burst through the door. I got my diploma, told the principal my tears were ones of joy, then sat back down. My classmate Tina, who has never liked me, gave me this sad, pitying look. At 11:20, I snuck out of the ceremony and went to grab my phone. I called my mom. No answer. Called my dad. Same thing. I sent mom a text that I needed her to answer because it's about my payslip being higher than usual. She called me instantly. I could hear music in the background. "How much higher?" she said in a monotone voice. "My payslip isn't higher," I told her. "My graduation is on right now." "You're on your way, right?" I asked, not sure if I even wanted the truth. Graduation? Yeah, she said, almost not paying attention. "Me and your dad are at the mechanic. The car broke down." I heard our cat meowing in the background. "Why is our cat with you at the mechanic?" I asked, almost in tears. Oh, the guy is calling us over to him. Gotta go, sweetie." She rushed through the sentence and ended the call. At 12 a.m., it was time for my valedictorian speech, in which I had originally thanked my parents. I stood up at the podium, and while I talked, Ms. Jacobs and the rest of my teachers kept giving me these sympathetic looks while glancing at the empty reserved seats. As I got off the stage, I thought about a few months ago when I agreed to start cooking dinners in the evenings, or how at 13 I stayed home and minded the dog for 2 weeks while my parents went on their 3rd vacation that summer, or the college applications I never got to submit because of how much time I spent helping them with everything. When graduation ended, my phone dinged with a message from my mom. "Sorry, sweetie, the car only got fixed now. Sorry we couldn't make it." Dad sent me a badly photoshopped image a few minutes later of our car's windshield being cracked. I remember sitting at the steering wheel in my car, looking out at my classmates walking with their families, tears streaming down my face. I looked over at the gift bags and the framed photos in the passenger seat and threw them onto the ground, however. I drove straight home instead of going to the fine dining restaurant I'd booked and prepaid for 3 people, and it's while turning into our living area that I saw my parents' car turn the corner, but they didn't see mine, so I decided to follow them. They went straight to the restaurant I had booked. At first I was actually happy. I thought maybe they felt bad and wanted to surprise me, but then I was let down once again. My parents didn't wait for me. They headed straight inside to their prepaid seats, where their 3-course menu was already paid for. They told their waiter that the 3rd person at their table, me, had an urgent errand to run and couldn't make it. And just like that, they began ordering food, wine, garlic bread on the side, all while toasting, doing Eskimo kisses, and laughing about how they finessed such a gourmet meal for free. That was when I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of my car and started heading straight for the restaurant. I pushed through the restaurant doors with my graduation gown still flowing behind me. The hostess looked startled at my appearance. Mascara streaked down my cheeks and cap askew. My parents sat at the corner table I'd specifically requested, the one with the view of the harbor. Mom was mid-laugh, holding up her wine glass while Dad fed her a piece of bruschetta. They froze when they saw me. Mom's wine glass hovered in the air, and Dad's hand stopped halfway to her mouth. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom set down her glass with deliberate slowness and arranged her face into an expression of surprise. Dad cleared his throat and gestured to the empty chair. I remained standing, my hands trembling as I gripped the back of the chair. The other diners were starting to notice the tension at our table. Mom reached for her purse and pulled out her phone, making a show of checking the time. She turned the screen toward Dad, who nodded gravely. They'd clearly rehearsed this performance. I watched them go through their charade, my anger building with each calculated movement. Dad flagged down the waiter and ordered another glass of water, as if that would somehow make this situation normal. Mom straightened her napkin and smiled at me with that fake concern she'd perfected over the years. The waiter arrived with the water, looking uncomfortable as he set it down. I finally sat, my graduation gown pooling around the chair. Mom reached across the table, but I pulled my hands back. Dad shifted in his seat and loosened his tie. He'd worn his good suit, the one he saved for special occasions. Not for my graduation, apparently, but for a free meal. Mom wore the dress I'd bought her for her birthday last year with money from my second job. They exchanged glances, having one of their silent conversations. I'd seen this routine before, when they were coordinating their stories about why they needed money or couldn't attend my school events. Mom finally broke the silence by picking up her menu and studying it intently, even though she'd already ordered. Dad followed suit, hiding behind the leather-bound menu like a shield. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Several nearby diners looked over. My parents' eyes widened, and Mom's hand moved to her chest in that dramatic way she did when she wanted sympathy. Without a word, I turned and walked out, leaving them with their stolen meal. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice rise slightly, probably already spinning a story for the other diners about her ungrateful daughter. Outside, I leaned against my car, trying to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "That was very rude. We raised you better than that." I deleted it without responding and drove home. The house was quiet when I entered. Evidence of their rushed departure lay everywhere. Mom's coffee cup still half full on the counter. Dad's newspaper open to the sports section. The TV paused mid-show. I went to my room and started packing. Not everything everything, just essentials. My laptop, some clothes, important documents. As I folded my work uniform, I remembered all the shifts I'd picked up to help with their bills, the overtime I'd worked when Dad claimed his hours got cut, the raises I'd never seen because they went straight to household expenses. In the kitchen, I found the grocery money jar empty. Again. Next to it sat a note in Mom's handwriting. Borrowed for gas. Will replace. The date on it was 3 weeks old. I opened the fridge. Nearly empty except for leftovers from dinners I'd cooked. The freezer held only ice and a bottle of vodka. I checked the pantry. Bare shelves stared back at me. Despite the grocery money I'd contributed last week, my phone rang. Dad this time. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message. Sweetie, your mother is very hurt. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. We need to talk about your behavior. I almost laughed. My behavior, not theirs. I heard their car pull into the driveway sooner than expected. They must have rushed through the meal. I grabbed my packed bag and headed for the back door, but stopped. Running away wouldn't solve anything. They entered through the front, talking in hushed tones. Mom's heels clicked on the hardwood floor as she went straight to the kitchen. I heard her opening cabinets, probably looking for wine. Dad appeared in my doorway, his face set in that stern expression he used when he wanted to seem authoritative. He looked at my packed bag, then at me. Mom joined him, holding a glass of water since she hadn't found any wine. They stood there like disappointed parents from a sitcom, except this wasn't funny. Dad crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. Mom sipped her water and sighed dramatically. They were waiting for me to apologize, to fall back into our usual pattern where I was always wrong and they were always the victims. I sat on my bed and looked at them, really looked at them. Dad's suit had a stain on the lapel. Mom's dress had a small tear at the hem. They looked older than I remembered, worn down by their own choices. Mom set down her water glass on my dresser without a coaster, leaving a ring on the wood. She sat next to me on the bed, close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with wine from lunch. Dad remained in the doorway, standing guard like I might bolt. He kept checking his phone, probably worried about missing something more important than this conversation. Mom patted my knee in that condescending way she had. I moved away, creating distance between us. She frowned but didn't pursue it. They waited for me to speak first, to explain myself, to apologize. I'd done it so many times before. Apologized for not earning enough, for needing school supplies, for wanting to go to college instead of working full-time. But I stayed silent this time. The silence stretched on, becoming uncomfortable. Dad shifted his weight. Mom fidgeted with her wedding ring. Still, I said nothing. Finally, Dad cleared his throat again. He pulled out his phone and showed me something on the screen. A photo of their broken windshield, the same badly edited image from earlier. He seemed proud of it, like he'd really fooled me. Mom reached for her purse and pulled out a receipt. From the mechanic, she claimed, though I could see it was from a liquor store. They'd gotten sloppy with their lies, too confident in my usual acceptance. I stood up and walked to my closet, pulling out a folder I'd hidden behind old textbooks. Inside were pay stubs, bank statements, receipts, evidence of every dollar I'd contributed, every bill I'd paid, every loan they'd never repaid. I spread the papers on my bed. Mom's face went pale. Dad's phone hand dropped to his side. They hadn't expected me to keep track. The numbers told a clear story. Thousands of dollars over the years. Money that should have gone to my college fund, my future, my dreams. Instead, it funded their nights out, their hobbies, their conveniences. Mom tried to gather up the papers, but I blocked her. Oh boy. Nothing says, "We're sorry we missed your graduation," like showing you the same fake broken windshield photo from earlier, like maybe you forgot about it in the last hour. And Mom pulling out a liquor store receipt trying to pass it off as a mechanic bill. That's some real amateur hour stuff right there. I mean, at least fold it so we can't see the wine prices. Dad stepped forward, then stopped when he saw my expression. They weren't used to me standing my ground. I picked up my bag and moved toward the door. Dad didn't step aside at first, testing whether I'd back down. I waited. Finally, he moved. In the hallway, I turned back to look at them. They stood in my room looking lost, like actors who'd forgotten their lines. The papers remained spread on my bed, evidence they couldn't explain away. I went to the bathroom and grabbed my toiletries. In the kitchen, I took the emergency cash I'd hidden in an old coffee can. They followed me, hovering but not speaking. At the front door, I paused. Mom reached out again, but her hand stopped short of touching me. Dad stood behind her, his authority act completely abandoned. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face, a contrast to the cold house behind me. My car waited in the driveway, packed with my immediate future. Before I could reach my car, Mom called out from the doorway. She held my graduation cap, the one I'd left in the restaurant. She must have grabbed it on their way out. A small gesture, but too little, too late. I took it from her without a word and tossed it in my backseat. Dad appeared beside her, and they stood in the doorway like a portrait of concerned parents. The neighbors might even believe it. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them in my rearview mirror, still standing there, probably already planning their next move, their next manipulation, but I wouldn't be around to see it. I drove to my friend Sarah's apartment, where I'd already arranged to crash for a few days. She answered the door with a hug and no questions, just like I'd hoped. Her couch wasn't much, but it was honest. That night, I turned off my phone. I knew it would be full of messages, each one designed to pull me back, but for the first time in my life, I chose myself over their needs. The morning sun streaming through Sarah's living room window woke me. My back ached from the lumpy couch, but the discomfort felt insignificant compared to the relief of being away from my parents. Sarah had already left for her shift at the coffee shop, leaving a note with her spare key and instructions for the shower. I checked my phone against my better judgment. 43 missed calls, 67 text messages. The voicemail box was full. I scrolled through the texts without reading them, catching glimpses of phrases like worried sick and call immediately, and this is unacceptable. The manipulation tactics were so predictable now that I could see them clearly. After showering, I dressed in my work uniform and headed to my job at the grocery store. My manager, Alexandra, greeted me with concern when she saw my puffy eyes. I explained that I'd moved out suddenly and was staying with a friend. She nodded knowingly and mentioned that the assistant manager position was still open if I wanted more hours. During my break, I sat in the employee lounge calculating my finances. With both jobs, I could afford a small studio apartment if I was careful. The realization that I'd been supporting 3 people on what could barely support one made my stomach turn. All those times Mom claimed they were struggling, all those emergency expenses that mysteriously arose whenever I got paid. My coworker Vic joined me at the table, noticing my paperwork. He mentioned his cousin had a studio apartment available in a safe neighborhood. The rent was reasonable and utilities were included. I wrote down the information, feeling a spark of hope. The afternoon shift passed quickly until I spotted a familiar figure by the produce section. Mom was there, dramatically dabbing stabbing at her eyes while talking to Mrs. Chen from down the street. She hadn't seen me yet, but I could hear her voice carrying across the store, lamenting about her runaway daughter who'd abandoned them after everything they'd done for her. I ducked into the stockroom and waited until Alexandra confirmed Mom had left. Apparently, she'd made quite a scene, telling anyone who'd listen about my cruelty and ingratitude. Several regular customers had witnessed the performance. After work, I drove to my second job at the restaurant. The dinner rush kept me too busy to think about my parents, but during a slow moment, my coworker Klaus mentioned seeing my graduation photos on social media. Other classmates' parents had posted proud pictures. Mine had posted nothing. Sarah texted that my parents had shown up at her apartment building. The doorman hadn't let them in, but they'd waited outside for 2 hours. She'd taken a photo from her window showing them sitting on the hood of their car, Mom crying dramatically while Dad paced back and forth on his phone. That evening, I viewed the studio apartment Vic's cousin had mentioned. It was small but clean, with a kitchenette and a tiny bathroom. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, was understanding about my situation and agreed to let me move in immediately with just first month's rent. I signed the lease with shaking hands, officially having my own place. Back at Sarah's, I found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a letter from Mom, written in her careful script. She detailed all the sacrifices they'd made for me, listing every birthday party, every Christmas present, every meal they'd provided as if keeping score. The manipulation was so transparent now that I wondered how I'd fallen for it for so long. The next morning brought a new tactic. Dad had contacted my manager at the grocery store, claiming a family emergency and insisting she give him my schedule. Alexandra, thankfully, had refused and warned me about the call. He'd gotten angry when she wouldn't comply, even threatening to speak to corporate. I spent my lunch break at the bank, opening a new account at a different branch. The teller helped me set up additional security measures after I explained my situation. While there, I discovered something disturbing. My old account showed several attempted logins from the day I'd left. My parents had been trying to access my money. Moving into the studio apartment that afternoon felt surreal. I had almost nothing, just my clothes and a few personal items, but the empty space felt more like home than my parents' house ever had. Sarah helped me carry in my bags and gifted me a set of dishes from the thrift store. While unpacking, I found my old diary from high school. Reading through it revealed a pattern I hadn't recognized before. Entry after entry detailed times I'd given up opportunities to help my parents. The science camp I couldn't attend because Mom suddenly needed surgery that turned out to be elective cosmetic work. The scholarship interview I missed because Dad's car mysteriously broke down and needed my savings to fix. My phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my aunt, Mom's sister, calling to mediate. She launched into a lecture about family loyalty and respecting one's parents. When I tried to explain my side, she cut me off, clearly only interested in delivering the message she'd been given. The next few days established a routine. Work, save money, ignore the constant attempts at contact. But my parents weren't giving up. They started showing up at the grocery store during my shifts, forcing me to hide in the back. They waited outside the restaurant after closing, requiring my coworkers to walk me to my car. One evening, I discovered they'd been to my apartment building. My neighbor mentioned a couple had been knocking on doors, claiming to be looking for their daughter who'd been brainwashed by bad influences. The property manager had eventually asked them to leave. The escalation continued when I received a letter from my parents' lawyer. Not a real legal threat, but a formal-looking document demanding I return home and resume my familial obligations. The letter listed all the money they claimed I owed them for my upbringing, calculating 18 years of expenses down to the penny. I showed the letter to Sarah, who pointed out the ridiculousness of parents billing their child for existing. She helped me research, and we discovered that nothing in the letter had any legal standing. It was pure intimidation, designed to scare me into compliance. My workplace drama intensified when Mom started calling during every shift, tying up the store's phone lines with sob stories. She'd cry to whoever answered about her missing daughter, making it difficult for actual customers to get through. Alexandra had to threaten to involve the police before the calls stopped. Dad tried a different approach, showing up at the restaurant during the dinner rush with a bouquet of flowers. He made a big show of trying to reconcile, loud enough for all the customers to hear. My manager had to escort him out when he refused to leave, but not before several tables had witnessed the scene. The financial pressure mounted when I realized how much of my earnings had been going to my parents. Without those drains, I could actually save money, but starting from zero was harder than I'd anticipated. Every dollar counted, and I found myself working extra shifts just to build a small emergency fund. One morning, I woke to find my car had been tampered with. Nothing serious, but my tires had been partially deflated, and someone had left a note under the windshield. "Family comes first," it read in Dad's handwriting. The childishness of the act would have been funny if it wasn't so frustrating. I invested in a security camera for my apartment door after that incident. Within a week, it captured footage of my parents trying to slip letters under the door at various hours. Mom even tried picking the lock at one point, though she gave up quickly when it didn't work. The emotional manipulation reached new heights when they started using other relatives as messengers. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to meet for coffee. My grandmother called crying, fed lies about me being on substances or in an abusive relationship. Each contact required energy to deflect and defend. Work became my refuge, but even there, the situation followed me. Customers who knew my parents would make comments about the family situation, clearly having heard one-sided stories. Some gave me pitying looks, others seemed judgmental, as if I was wrong for not accepting whatever treatment my parents dished out. 3 weeks into my independence, I discovered the depth of their deception. While organizing my documents, I found old bank statements I'd grabbed in my hurry to leave. Comparing them to my pay stubs revealed discrepancies. Money I thought went to rent had been withdrawn for other purposes. Deposits I'd made for household expenses had been redirected. The pattern was clear. They'd been siphoning money from me for years, always with reasonable explanations that I'd never questioned. The broken appliances that needed immediate replacement. The emergency medical bills that insurance supposedly didn't cover. The property tax increases that happened to coincide with my raises. I created a spreadsheet documenting everything I could remember. The numbers were staggering. Thousands upon thousands of dollars, taken under false pretenses. Money that could have paid for college, could have given me a real start in life. Instead, it had funded their comfortable lifestyle while I struggled. My anger fueled determination. I picked up every extra shift available, sometimes working 16-hour days between both jobs. My feet ached and my back protested, but each paycheck that went entirely into my own account felt like a victory. The apartment slowly became more livable as as I furnished it with thrift store finds and hand-me-downs from coworkers. Each small addition, a lamp here, a chair there, represented my independence. The parents switched up real quick, didn't they? Nothing says loving family like trying to pick your kid's lock and leaving passive-aggressive, tire-deflating notes like they're in middle school. I love how they calculated 18 years of expenses down to the penny. Did they include the cost of the pen they used to write it? And mom trying to pick the lock but giving up quickly just shows she put about as much effort into breaking in as she did into showing up to graduation. The space was mine, earned with my own labor, free from manipulation and lies. Mom's tactics shifted to public embarrassment. She started a social media campaign, posting old photos of us with captions about missing her beloved daughter. People who didn't know the real story shared them, adding prayers and supportive comments. The narrative she crafted painted me as troubled and her as the long-suffering mother. I blocked her on all platforms but heard about the posts from friends. Some reached out privately, having sensed something off about the dramatic displays. Others, unfortunately, believed the performance and lectured me about forgiveness and family values. The stress affected my work performance. I made mistakes on orders, mixed up schedules, struggled to maintain my usual efficiency. Alexandra noticed and pulled me aside, not to scold, but to offer support. She'd escaped a similar situation with her own family years ago and understood the toll it took. Her advice was practical. Document everything. Save all messages and letters. Keep records of every incident, not for legal purposes, but for my own validation when the gaslighting made me question my decisions. The folder of evidence grew thicker each week. Dad attempted a new strategy, showing up at my apartment with a box of my childhood things. Photos, report cards, artwork from elementary school. He left it outside my door with a note about remembering better times. The emotional manipulation was obvious, but seeing those memories still hurt. I stored the box unopened in my closet. Those memories were tainted now, colored by the realization that even then, I'd been more of a resource than a daughter. Every good grade had been celebrated not for my achievement, but for what it might mean for their future support. My 20th birthday approached with mixed feelings. Last year's celebration had ended with me paying for everyone's dinner. This year, I planned nothing special, just a quiet evening in my own space. But Mom had other plans. She organized a surprise party at our old house, inviting extended family and mutual friends. Then she called, crying about how she'd planned everything, and I'd ruined it by not showing up. The guilt trip might have worked before, but now I recognized it as another manipulation tactic. The flying monkeys, as I'd learned to call them, increased their efforts. People I barely knew felt entitled to opinions about my family situation. Each encounter drained energy I needed for building my new life. I became expert at deflecting, at changing subjects, at protecting my peace. My financial situation slowly improved, but setbacks occurred. The car needed repairs I couldn't postpone. A tooth infection required treatment my insurance didn't fully cover. Each expense reminded me how much harder everything was without the safety net I'd been providing for my parents, instead of building for myself. Work relationships became complicated as the drama spillover continued. Some coworkers grew tired of the constant interruptions from my parents. Others took sides based on incomplete information. I focused on being professional and reliable, letting my work speak louder than the gossip. The apartment building's security footage revealed increasingly desperate attempts to make contact. Mom had tried bribing the maintenance man for a key. Dad had attempted to follow other residents through the security door. Their behavior escalated from manipulative to genuinely concerning. I considered a restraining order but hesitated. Despite everything, part of me struggled with taking legal action against my parents. The conditioning ran deep. Those years of being told family was everything, that their needs came first, that I owed them for my existence. Instead, I sent one final message through my aunt. I would have no contact until they acknowledged the financial abuse and emotional manipulation, until they could respect my boundaries and treat me as an adult, not a resource to be exploited. The response was predictable. More guilt, more anger, more denial. My life settled into a new rhythm. Work, home, slow progress towards stability. The studio apartment felt more like home each day. I cooked my own meals, managed my own money, made my own decisions. The freedom was intoxicating, even when accompanied by struggle. Coworkers became friends as I opened up about my situation. Many had their own stories of family dysfunction, of breaking free from toxic patterns. The support network I'd never known I needed began to form, built on mutual understanding and respect. The financial documentation I'd compiled revealed patterns beyond just that. There were credit cards opened in my name that I'd never known about, bills that had gone to collections affecting my credit score. Each discovery added another layer to the betrayal, another obstacle to overcome. I spent evenings educating myself about financial literacy, something my parents had actively discouraged. Every article about budgeting, every video about building credit, every book about economic independence felt like rebellion against their control. 6 weeks after leaving, I achieved a small milestone. My first full month of bills paid entirely on my own. Rent, utilities, food, transportation, all covered by my own earnings. The accomplishment felt massive, even though it was something most adults took for granted. The harassment continued, but became more predictable. Sunday evening calls to my workplace, Wednesday attempts to access my apartment, Friday social media campaigns. The pattern made it easier to prepare for and deflect. Their playbook was limited, recycling the same tactics with diminishing returns. I started therapy with a counselor who specialized in family trauma. The sessions were difficult, unpacking years of normalized dysfunction, learning that love shouldn't come with price tags, that boundaries weren't betrayal, that choosing myself wasn't selfish. Each week brought new revelations about the depth of the manipulation. Things I'd accepted as normal were anything but. The therapist helped me understand terms like financial abuse, emotional blackmail, parentification. Having words for what I'd experienced made it real, valid, worth escaping. My parents made one last dramatic gesture, showing up at my workplace with a camera crew from a local news station. They'd convinced a reporter they were parents desperately seeking their missing daughter. The narrative they'd crafted bore no resemblance to reality. Alexandra intercepted them before they could enter, explaining to the reporter that I was an adult who'd chosen to distance myself from my family. The crew left without a story, but the attempt showed how far my parents would go to maintain their victim narrative. That night, I sat in my small apartment, looking around at the life I'd built in just 6 weeks. It wasn't much by most standards. Secondhand furniture, a tiny space, a fragile financial situation. But it was mine, earned honestly, free from manipulation. The journey ahead remained challenging. Building credit damaged by identity theft, saving for emergencies without backup, creating boundaries with family who refused to respect them, but for the first time in my life, I faced these challenges on my own terms. My phone sat silent on the counter, no longer buzzing with guilt trips and manipulation. The freedom in that silence was worth every struggle, every 16-hour shift, every moment of doubt. I'd chosen myself, and that choice opened possibilities I'd never dared imagine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, I allowed myself a moment of pride. The girl who'd stood at graduation waiting for parents who chose a free meal over her achievement had become a woman who chose herself over their exploitation. The 7th week brought an unexpected development. I arrived at work to find Mom waiting in the parking lot, slumped against my car with a hospital bracelet on her wrist. She clutched medical paperwork and looked genuinely ill. My instinct to help warred with suspicion as I approached cautiously. She explained through tears that she'd been diagnosed with a serious condition requiring expensive treatment. The papers looked authentic, complete with doctor signatures and test results. She needed my insurance information and financial help immediately. The timing felt too convenient, but the fear in her eyes seemed real. I took photos of the documents and told her I'd research treatment options. Her face hardened when I didn't immediately offer money. She grabbed my arm as I tried to leave, her grip surprisingly strong for someone supposedly ill. Security cameras caught the interaction, including her sudden recovery when she thought I wasn't looking. That evening, I called the hospital listed on her paperwork. After explaining my concerns, they confirmed no patient by her name had been admitted or diagnosed recently. The documents were elaborate forgeries, complete with fake physician names and fabricated test results. The betrayal cut deeper than previous lies. Dad escalated his tactics the following day. He appeared at my apartment with 2 police officers, claiming I'd stolen valuable family heirlooms when I moved out. The officers seemed skeptical but had to investigate. I showed them my sparse belongings, obviously containing nothing of value beyond basic necessities. The search revealed Dad had planted an expensive watch in my car earlier, hoping to frame me. Security footage from the parking garage showed him breaking into my vehicle that morning. The officers warned him about filing false reports and left. His face as they drove away mixed fury with desperation. Work became increasingly difficult as my parents recruited others to their campaign. Former family friends would appear during my shifts, trying to corner me with emotional appeals. Each interaction required careful navigation to avoid scenes that might jeopardize my employment. One particularly challenging evening, my parents orchestrated their most elaborate scheme yet. They convinced my elderly neighbor that I was mentally unstable and dangerous. She called building management, terrified. I spent hours with the property manager reviewing security footage that showed my parents coaching her on what to say. The property manager implemented additional security measures, but the damage to my reputation in the building was done. Some neighbors now avoided me in the hallways, believing the lies they'd been told. The isolation hurt more than I expected. My 20th birthday arrived with an unwelcome surprise. A process server delivered papers claiming my parents were suing me for elder abuse and financial exploitation. The irony would have been laughable if the situation weren't so serious. The lawsuit sought damages exceeding my annual income. I spent my birthday researching legal aid options instead of celebrating. The case was clearly frivolous, but defending against it would cost money I didn't have. My parents knew this, counting on financial pressure to force me back under their control. Sarah connected me with a paralegal friend who reviewed the lawsuit pro bono. He identified numerous procedural errors and helped me file a response highlighting the lack of evidence. The court date was set for 3 weeks away, giving my parents time to escalate further. They began showing up at both my jobs simultaneously, forcing me to choose which confrontation to face. Mom would create scenes at the grocery store while Dad disrupted the restaurant. My manager's patience wore thin despite their understanding of my situation. The breaking point came when they accessed my old email account, which I'd forgotten was linked to their home computer. They sent resignation letters to both my employers, hoping to destroy my income sources. Fortunately, my managers recognized the deception and called me directly. I spent a sleepless night changing every password, securing all accounts, and documenting this latest violation. The folder of evidence had grown thick enough to fill a banker's box. Each document represented another betrayal, another attempt to control me through deception. 2 weeks before the court date, Mom attempted her most desperate manipulation. She arrived at my apartment in the middle of the night, bruised and crying, claiming Dad had become violent. She begged for shelter, playing on every protective instinct I'd developed over years of taking care of them. Something felt wrong about her story. The bruises looked too symmetrical, too carefully placed. When I suggested calling the police, she panicked and tried to change the subject. I offered to drive her to a women's shelter instead, and her demeanor shifted instantly from victim to aggressor. Security footage later revealed the truth. She'd applied theatrical makeup in the hallway before knocking on my door. The bruises were nothing more than eyeshadow and careful shading. The preparation showed a level of calculated cruelty I hadn't imagined possible. Dad's final attempt came through financial warfare. He'd kept copies of my old checks and used them to drain my original bank account, which still had a few $100s I'd overlooked. The bank initially refused to help, citing the authorized signatures. I spent days gathering evidence that the signatures were forged, comparing them to recent documents. The bank eventually reversed the transactions, but the stress of nearly losing my emergency fund left me shaken. Every small financial cushion I built seemed vulnerable to their attacks. The court date arrived with unexpected revelations. My parents appeared confident until the judge reviewed their filing. Their lawyer, clearly uncomfortable with the case, struggled to present any coherent argument. My simple response highlighting their lack of evidence seemed to surprise them. During the proceedings, their lies began to unravel. They claimed I'd lived rent-free while stealing from them, but couldn't produce any evidence when pressed. Their stories contradicted each other repeatedly. Mom said I'd never contributed financially, while Dad simultaneously claimed I owed them for expenses they'd covered. The judge dismissed their case with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile the same claims. He also noted their harassment pattern evident in the security footage and documentation I'd provided. While stopping short of issuing a restraining order, he warned them that continued harassment could result in criminal charges. Outside the courthouse, they made one last attempt at manipulation. Mom collapsed dramatically on the steps, clutching her chest. Dad screamed for help, accusing me of causing her heart attack. Paramedics arrived quickly and found nothing wrong beyond elevated blood pressure from her own theatrics. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the evidence of their campaign against me. Forged documents, threatening letters, screenshots of lies spread on social media. The sheer volume of their efforts to destroy my independence was staggering, but something had shifted during the court proceedings. Watching their lies crumble under scrutiny, seeing their manipulation tactics fail in a formal setting, I felt the last chains of obligation break. They were no longer the parents I'd tried so hard to please, but adversaries who'd chosen greed over love. I drafted a final letter, not asking for reconciliation but stating boundaries. Any future contact would go through legal channels. Any harassment would be met with criminal complaints. Any attempts to access my finances would be prosecuted. The bridge wasn't just burned, it was demolished. The weeks following the court date brought blessed quiet. No calls to my workplace, no surprise visits, no manipulative letters. The silence felt strange after months of constant assault on my boundaries. I found myself checking security cameras out of habit, expecting their return. Work life stabilized without constant interruptions. Alexandra promoted me to assistant manager, noting my reliability throughout the chaos. The position came with better pay and health insurance, small steps toward the stability I craved. My coworkers, who'd witnessed the drama firsthand, formed a protective buffer against any future intrusions. My credit report revealed more damage than expected. Beyond the cards I'd discovered, there were loans taken out using my information, collection accounts from bills they'd put in my name. Each dispute required documentation, phone calls, letters. The process felt endless but necessary. Therapy sessions shifted from crisis management to processing deeper wounds, understanding how my parents had groomed me from childhood to prioritize their needs, to see my value only in what I could provide. The therapist helped me recognize patterns I might repeat in other relationships without intervention. Building new relationships proved challenging. Trust came slowly when you'd been betrayed by those who should have protected you, but gradually, genuine connections formed. Coworkers became friends, neighbors became familiar faces, and my world expanded beyond survival mode. 6 months after leaving, I achieved another milestone. My credit score had improved enough to qualify for a better apartment. Still modest, but with proper heating and a real kitchen. Moving day felt like a victory lap, each box representing progress toward the life I deserved. The news of my parents reached me through distant relatives. They'd moved to a smaller place, their lifestyle unsustainable without my contributions. Part of me felt guilty, but the larger part recognized this as consequences of their choices, not my responsibility. I learned they'd tried similar tactics with extended family, seeking financial support through manipulation and lies. But word had spread about their treatment of me. The relatives who'd once pressured me to reconcile now kept their distance from my parents' schemes. My new normal settled into peaceful routines, work, home, gradual progress toward goals that had seemed impossible. Each paycheck that went toward my future instead of their demands felt like rebellion and freedom combined. The girl who'd stood at graduation waiting for parents who chose a free meal had finally chosen herself completely. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing.